随着中国迅速崛起，乌克兰战局持续升温，以及金砖国家联盟全球经济实力逐步增强，众多观点认为，我们正迈向全新的多极世界秩序，标志着美国主导和单极格局的时代逐渐逝去。那么，单极、多极和美国主导这些词汇究竟意味着什么呢？而如果我们正身处于新的多极世界秩序中，究竟会是混乱还是和平？我们的时代是否将迎来自由或压制？
So today I'm speaking with Dr. Devalera Bachwe and Dr. Musa Traore, who are professors at the University of Cape Coast, Ghana. Dr. Valera is a professor of history, specializing in Africa and the African diaspora, and Dr. Traore is a professor of English, specializing in post-colonialism and literature from the Francophone Caribbean. His book, Realigning and Repositioning Africa, is available on Amazon. Together, Drs. Bachwe and Traore are co-authors in the book A Certain Amount of Madness, The Life, Politics, and Legacies of Thomas Sankara. Their newest paper, Thomas Sankara, An Intellectual Statesman in Power, Culture, and Education in Burkina Faso, a review after 30 years, is available in the book, The Political Impact of African Military Leaders. Hi, thank you guys for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so my series is about multipolarity, and I've been asking everyone who has done interviews with me, do you think that we are moving into a multipolar world? Is multipolar a good word to describe what we're living in?
From what you're going to say?
No, I would say that you go ahead first and I'll follow.
Okay, sure, no problem. Yeah, Wallace, I would say definitely, yeah, multipolarity is the right word to use now, because I believe that multipolarity has always been there, but to me it is more pronounced now. For me, it started, I would say just after the independence, so-called independence of the African countries, when you had the two blocks, the Eastern Bloc and the Western one, the communist and the capitalist, and at some point it became more complicated again, even non-aligned or unaligned ones, became free, right? But now for me, it is even more than those free. Because, with what is happening in African countries now, you have new alliances that are being created, and the first thing that comes to my mind is what Russia and what she is doing now in Africa, and at the same time, you're talking about the US, informally when we were talking a couple of minutes ago, we have a new dimension now, a new form that the US, foreign policy has taken. So of course you have you have a capitalist bloc, no direct Eastern bloc, so the Western bloc is there, apparently the dominant one, but you have new alignments emerging now in Africa, even within the continent. Think about Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea. They have a bloc which is influencing others like Niger. So again, what is happening in West Africa now, and not to say the whole of Africa now, the anti-French, sentiment, that cannot be neglected. That's another parameter, another pole which is emerging. You understand me? So you have, I would say, the traditional or the orthodox, capitalist bloc with the US and France. Now you have the African, I would say, West African, and to some extent the whole African, bloc which is emerging with, I would say, revolutions, so-called revolutions related to the jihadist, I would say, interventions. Okay, and then you have other coups that are not related to the jihadist movement, but of Gabon. You understand me? So again, you have the US, you have France, you have Russia, you have Burkina, Mali, Guinea. I guess you're free, and you have Gabon now, anti-French, 4. So again, multipolarity, I would say, is really the word to use now. Yeah, that's it.
And you sort of see almost fractioning, more and more growing multipolarities, more and more poles almost multiplying all the time. Dr. Bachwe, do you have any thoughts? How do you feel about multipolarity?
Yeah.
Sure.
Exactly.
I think that it is what is happening right
That's
now.
what I see now.
In the world, considering the fact that when you look at it, at least historically from the time of the outbreak of the Second World War, you had the emergence of two strong blocs represented at the forefront by the United States and Russia leading the USSR and United States leading the Western Front. But of course, we have to understand that over the years, there has been a certain kind of desire on the part of other countries to be at the table too and get their voices heard. And so we have seen after the so-called fall of the USSR, we saw the emergence of other blocs that also did not even want to identify with any particular country considered to be a traditional power, but to emerge in their own, strength as really led to the emergence of different, or you have this process of the emergence of different powers, each trying to, in a way, have a piece of the world cake. The focus tends to be now on Africa, like what is happening in Africa. But I don't think that the focus should be on Africa. The focus should be on the world, what is happening in the world. Otherwise, Africa always becomes that place where, the world studies. Okay, if Europe catches a cold, or if Europe sneezes, Africa catches a cold. This has been an old maxim, but Africa should not be. Africa is made up of 50-something odd countries, and within Africa, you have powerful countries economically and politically. South Africa is a powerful entity, and it's aligned to the BRICS, group. And you have a country like maybe Equatorial Guinea. It is a country, but it is not considered a power bloc in Africa. So you have different groups emerging, and it is going to continue as long as people have seen that it's important, or countries have seen that it is important to have some kind of global respect. They will continue to seek for a place at the global table and get their voices heard. So it is happening globally.
Well, that sounds, quite hopeful for the world. So Sankara, he identified as a Marxist, but when he became president of Burkina Faso in 1983, he never declared Burkina Faso to be a communist or a Marxist country. But he did have a whole bunch of campaigns and programs that were definitely socialist influence or Marxist influence. So in your book, A Certain Amount of Madness, you use the term Praetorian Marxists to describe Sankara. What is a Praetorian Marxist? And also, are there any ways that Sankara was different from a conventional Praetorian Marxist?
I think that the term Praetorian Marxist was carefully chosen. Of course, being a term borrowed from Paul Nugent. Paul Nugent, being a professor of history, and I think he taught in the University of Edinburgh, and he wrote a very good book on Africa after independence. And he used that term to describe the kind of military regimes that emerged on the African continent. And he has this kind of typology where he talks about one military regime being a redeemer regime. So they come in with this redeemer complex, so they're coming to redeem, the country or the people from oppression and corruption. You have another group that comes in and they are more like usurper. So they come in just to usurp power and stay in power, and after some time they even take off the military fatigue or the camouflage or the khaki, and they start wearing suit. So they stay in power and not really ready to go. And you have those who come in and they're known as the reformer regimes. So he basically created, I think, 4 categories of and other scholars created 4 categories of military regimes we've had in Africa. But there's also that military regime that is described as the Praetorian Marxist. So Praetorian, which takes us to the Roman world, where had the Praetorian guards being military in outlook. So these guards using it as a metaphor for the soldiers of today, of independence, post-independence Africa. He used that to say the Praetorians, the soldiers who are Marxists. And these soldiers, whether they pay lip service to the idea of Marxism or truly they are Marxists, they come in with a certain notion that the coup d'etat is part of the class struggle. The coup d'etats or the military takeovers that they orchestrate is part of the class struggle. And they consider themselves, of course, interpreting Marxists in their own, local spaces, and not, following a certain kind of doctrinaire Marxism. They come in saying that, of course, we are also part of the masses, and we are inspired by these social changes and class struggle to take power. So their action, they define their action as the action of the masses against the haves or those people who have. So, however, this occurs within the space of the military. And when that happens, they also look back to the populace, to the civilians who throw their weight behind them, and they go like, so you see, this is not just a group of soldiers in khaki who are interested in overthrowing the thieves and the bourgeoisie class, but we also have the people behind it. So they consider it at times to be a popular revolution, however, inspired by class struggle. And they try to explain this within the context of Marxism. So that is why, the term Praetorian Marxist has been used to describe people like Thomas Sankara, Haile Mengistu Mariam of Ethiopia, Nguema, and others on the African continent. And so we used that to describe Sankara because we were writing specifically about Sankara. And Sankara did actually articulate that apart from he being a soldier as a human being, he had read Marxism and he was influenced by Marxism. He loved Marxism. However, when it comes to translating the idea of Marxism on the ground, he had a different opinion. He pursued the regime that he was at the forefront using pragmatism. In other words, looking at what will work within the context of Burkina Faso and drawing on different ideologies that fundamentally were anti-neocolonialism and anti-exploitation. So whatever idea, whatever ideology that was against neocolonialism, I think that Sankara was ready to embrace. However, he proceeded as someone who was highly interested in socialist, programs and policies and Pan-Africanism. So that is how I will explain the term Praetorian Marxist as we used for Thomas Sankara.
See. So then I guess that brings us to the next question, which is after Ibrahim Traore did his coup in 2022 and appointed as his prime minister Apollinaire Kielem. Kielem is self-proclaimed Sankaraist. You describe a difference between Sankaraists and Sankarians. Could you explain what the difference is?
I would say the Sankarists and the Sankarians. So today, when you talk about a Sankarist, people will say that you have a Sankarist party, which is led by a lawyer, Maitre Sankara. So the Sankarists in general, there seem to be people who sort of stick too much to ideology, a little bit detached from the grassroots, a little bit detached from the pragmatic dimension, but from bourgeois. That's the Sankarists. So the Sankarists in general, I would say, they are somehow general relates to, or they all those across the globe who are interested in Sankara's ideas. Sankarians in Burkina Faso today, to look at the context, the denomination, the Sankarians are looked at as people who, in a pragmatic manner, follow the footpaths of Sankara, but do actions, they sort of make speeches, they view things, take positions that follow those of Sankara. So in such a case, I would say that Apollinaire, KLM is a Sankarist and also a Sankarian. I mean, he falls within the two categories. A Sankarist, because he embraced Sankara's ideas very, very early when he was a student in France. And in the 1980s when Sankara was president, he even sort of founded, a movement of the youth, that would support, the Sankara Revolution in Burkina Faso when he was studying, a law in Nice in France. And he also went into writing, wrote so many books about Sankara and his revolution and I would say development. I'm sort of going through such a book right now, that book. So yeah, we could say Sankarism and Sankarist, it is there in the Prime Minister, in Apollinaire, right? But Sankarian also because of what is taking place now in Burkina Faso. I'll mention one or two examples. It's very common today to hear that Traoré is Sankara reincarnated, because there's such a striking resemblance between everything Traoré does and everything Sankara did. I'm glad you talked about Che Guevara when we was talking. Sankara was the Che Guevara of Africa. He was called that way. And when you look at Traoré also, it's, so striking the way he dresses. Look at the speech he sort of made, in Russia recently, when they met Vladimir Putin and others. A very short speech, but people listened to, and they had the impression that they were listening to Thomas Sankara. Thomas Sankara made a powerful statement, and it can even rhyme to let you know that what Prabhupada was saying is true. Sankara was a well-read person, and in his speeches he would play with language. One of the statements is this one: we need aid, but aids us to stop asking for aid. Nous voulons l'aide qui nous aide à nous passer de l'aide in French. You understand me? And Traoré said the same thing, when the African president met with Putin. He said, sure, we're happy. You gave us some grain, to feed us. Because that's true. Putin sort of gave some food, I would say some grain, to sort of the jihadist, I would say, how can I say it, stricken countries that have been attacked by the jihadists, so certainly have some, I would say, a little bit of famine there, feeding oneself becomes a problem. So Putin sort of made a gesture by giving some food to them, to certain countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and others. Well, Traoré sort of, in response, he said, thank you very much. We are happy that Putin gave us some grain, some food this year. But next year, if we are to have a meeting, we wouldn't like to come and say thank you for giving us some food. Next year, when we are coming, we should have been well-fed, self-sufficient when it comes to feeding oneself, agricultural self-sufficiency, as Thomas Sankara was saying. The second thing that I call is Sankarian, strange enough, is what KLM and Traoré did when they came to power. One of them was sort of surprised everybody is the conditions of the president. Both KLM, the prime minister, and Traoré himself, the president, they believe that they do not want to be treated as a prime minister and as a president. They want to work as a president and as a prime minister, but living in conditions that befit the average Burkinabe. Now, that's why Captain Traoré said that I don't want to be paid as a president. I want to keep living on my salary, the salary of a captain of a Burkinabe army. That's one thing. And he said, I don't want to move into the presidential palace, the palace where Blaise Compaoré and all those who followed him used to stay, an air-conditioned area. He said, I'm a soldier. As a soldier, I'm supposed to sleep under a tent. These are conditions that sort of touched everybody. I would see that as Sankarian, because Sankara did the same thing. Sankara sort of went on radio and TV and sort of declared all his assets, all those things that belong to him, his properties. And he encouraged all his ministers to do the same thing. After Sankara passed away, that was never seen until 2022, when Traoré came to power. So that's where I can see, I would say, Sankarism with Prime Minister and Sankarianism with him also. And if Traore, 100% Sankarianism, can put it that way. Yeah.
That was actually the next question I was going to ask. Does that mean that Traore is Sankarian, whereas KLM is both Sankarist and Sankarian?
Yeah.
So then my next question is, part of the context of the coups in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Niger, is the Sahel insurgency. So does that provide a different context to the one that Sankara came to power in, right? Because Sankara, although he was combating neocolonialism, it was a time of peace. But now Traore and KLM, they are Sankarians, and they probably have similar socialist or Marxist even ideas, but they are also having to fight an insurgency on their northern border. Is that going to change the context of what Sankarianism or Sankaraism looks like?
Well, if I may come in, I would say no, it doesn't change because I would say a Sankarian practice is. Sankara came to power in certain conditions, during certain moments, but share a lot of commonalities with the time when Traoré did his coup, when Goïta did his coup in Guinea, in Mali, and when Doumbouya did the coup in Guinea. As the average revolutionary would say, the ground was fertile, the conditions were fertile and gathered and ripe. The terrain was prepared for certain action. Sankara came to power against a bourgeois military. When he was coming to power, Burkina Faso had almost, I would say, hundreds and hundreds of high-ranking military officers. Sankara used to use a term, an army which is what? Budgetivore. An army which is very just what? Eating up the budget, in an avaricious manner, devouring, the budget of the country. That's why he sort of suppressed the military academy. Yeah, that's the point, exactly. He said, we have enough military officers and turn the military academy into an ordinary high school where everybody's child could go. That's one thing. So the fight against a bourgeois army, the fight against a corrupt and incompetent army. You understand me? So Sankara transformed the Burkinabe army 100%, an army which is close to people. Prof. and I, we used to sort of say in our discussions, but Sankara would say, no, a military person, a military officer who's not close to civilians, to a population, is a criminal who has been empowered. So again, the renewal, working on the army again, the neo-colonial army, the army that France had prepared and trained, that was one of, I would say, the aims of Thomas Sankara. And the same thing was happening in Burkina Faso when Traoré did his coup. Traoré did his coup when Roch Kabore was overthrown. And Roch Kabore came after whom? Blaise Compaoré. And Blaise Compaoré, who after killing Sankara became a bourgeois, drinking whiskey. His allies were France, Cote d'Ivoire. His wife was given to him, to say, by Houphouët-Boigny. That was really the type of army officer whom Burkina Faso did not want. Although initially he and Sankara were one, he was, I would say, a Sankarist and a Sankarian, but some point he turned his coat, as my colleague, Prof. Boyke said. You understand me? Yeah. So that's what was happening when Traoré did his coup. Traoré did his coup because Blaise became a bourgeois, followed by Roch Marc-Christian Kabore, who was a bourgeois par excellence, a banker. Then a coup took place, led by Damiba. The coup that brought Damiba to power was led by Traoré and co, young army officers. They did the coup. And then in the group, they said, well, you, Damiba, you have more advance in rank, colonel or lieutenant colonel, so you take over. Damiba took over and went to fall into the trap of those who preceded him. To put it in a naked way, he was too much into drinking, into women, and sleeping while the jihadist attacks were going on. Was embezzling money while Burkina was wallowing in poverty. All those things were happening. That's why Traoré simply came and overthrew him. And when Traoré did his coup, Damiba was not in Burkina Faso. He was partying with one of his girlfriends in Cote d'Ivoire. You understand me? So yes, definitely, so I would say Traoré's action is both Sankarist and Sankarian. Yeah, that's it. That's it.
See.
I don't know if I answered your question. Yeah.
No, I think you did a great
Okay.
job of answering my question. And it also leads me to one of my next questions. A lot of the Western media is treating the coups in West Africa as the death of democracy. That's what they're calling it. But it sounds like there wasn't, at least in Burkina Faso, there wasn't very much democracy before, and possibly paradoxically after the coup, there's been more democracy now. Is that the case? Do you challenge the idea that the coups are ending democracy in West Africa?
First, I think that we have to understand that the term democracy is not a universal, label that shows who defines democracy and who's democracy. So if a certain part of the world's media is saying that this is the death of democracy, then perhaps they are referring to a particular type of democracy that they want to see, enveloping the whole world. And I think that it's important for us to even look at China, look at Russia, that these two places have been described by some media houses as non-democratic spaces. But when you ask these two countries or geopolitical entities, they will tell you that they are practicing democracy. It is their form of democracy. So democracy must be understood within specific geopolitical and cultural spaces. Perhaps the type of democracy that they are saying is dying is the one that they are used to in their country.
That's why my father sends out a tweet. Patriots descend on
Recently, we have
Washington,
seen certain spaces and
I've got a
places
question for you.
where
Is there any
that
person
type of
here
democracy that they are
that
referring to,
actually thinks that Joe
you know,
Biden won this election?
has suffered a lot of problems, to the point that they are even saying some people rigged the elections of a certain place. So it is important for us to critically, question such a statement from the media. If by the death of democracy they mean the military entering into politics, then that is something that we can interrogate and explain. When you have a society that openly embraces the military takeover, at least the masses openly embracing the military takeover, we must see that as a democratic response to a political change. In other words, the demos or the people are in favor of whatever means turned the political machinery around or changed the political situation. So we refer to that as democratic. Maybe it is not a change of government by the ballot box, right? But it's a change of the government by an aspect or a part of the society that ultimately had the general support of the people. So it's very important for us to pay attention to that. I will take a look at Libya, for example, where Muammar Gaddafi was leader and president. He did not subscribe to the idea of democracy. He had a certain political philosophy known as the Third Universal Theory that he used within an Islamic context. If we pay attention to, say, Saudi Arabia and all the other, Islamic countries, will we say that they practice democracy? Perhaps they adhere to a certain form of governance that enables them to exercise a certain unique democratic lifestyle. And at times, you find some people, the media saying, okay, this country has a monarch, a king. It is not democratic, but it is fine for the political space that we belong to and we promote as democratic to deal with them, even though they identify certain so-called human rights abuses in those spaces ruled by monarchs. So in West Africa, we have to understand that, yes, the military, we have seen from the 1960s to the present, it has been in and out of politics. And we have also seen how some of the military juntas come to power and they only stay in power for a short time, ensuring that things are put right, and they hand over power to civilians. In Ghana, for example, we had the AFRC, which was the Armed Forces Revolutionary Council, which came to power in the late 70s, I think 1979, yes, or 79, I think. And it stayed in power for about just 3 months and handed power over to a civilian government, right? Will we describe that as the death and resurrection of democracy? I think we should just consider it as part of the unfolding political, journey of Africa, considering also the fact that military interventions in African countries are products of a colonial order, because the kind of military regimes we have in Africa, or the military we have in Africa, are not products of African indigenous societies. The military is a product of the colonial order. And so we have to understand that it has become part of our reality, and the military happens to be part of a society or African society that is going through a period of, I would say, underdevelopment hangover. So these are part until African countries will find their own, form of ruling themselves and governance. We are going to have different experiments. Today we'll experiment with the military. Tomorrow we'll experiment with a person in suit and tie as a civilian ruler. Tomorrow we may even experiment with someone who will come in and proclaim himself as an emperor. In Africa, we had a soldier who took power, and after some time he said he was an emperor, and that was in Central African Republic, right? And that was a man by the name Jean Bedel Bokassa. He took power as a soldier, and later he said, this whole thing we call president, this whole thing we call military ruler, we experiment, okay, I'm an emperor right now. And so we keep going, and maybe it will get a point in time that something different will be created within Africa, because we are still trying to find, or Africa is still trying to find a more appropriate and workable political system to govern ourselves after colonialism.
Let's see. And to your point, it seems like even though in your country, Kwame Nkrumah came to power in elections, in generally uncontestedly fair elections by ballot box, Americans still sort of viewed him, Americans and the French viewed him as a demagogue, as a sort of authoritarian figure. They didn't count that as democracy anyway. But is there still hope for a ballot box based democracy in these areas? Do you think that Traore, for example, in Burkina Faso, will at all take inspiration maybe from Nkrumah and figure out how to create more coalition based parties the way Nkrumah did when he came to power in Ghana?
I think that if you say if there is still hope, then perhaps that is what maybe you want us to have. But we just have to leave it to the people. We just have to leave it to the people and to the historical fate of each country, because each country is on a certain journey, which is historical. And so we just have to leave it to them, unless we take just one side and say, okay, why don't we even return to the time when we had indigenous chiefs ruling the African societies? Why is that not a viable or a good alternative? Why should it be the ballot box election? So there are different ways of governing a people, or people governing themselves. Before colonialism, there was no precedent in Africa. Before colonialism, there was no ballot box in Africa, but African societies had ways of exhibiting democratic lifestyles. It existed in Africa. Democracy didn't emerge from Athens to Africa. Africa had democratic life ways. It manifested just differently. So if we're in the post-colonial, moment or period, as I said, we're experimenting with different forms of governance. And maybe, some African countries will say, we are fed up with the military. We are fed up with civilian governments. Let's return to our chiefs. Would that be a bad alternative? Would that be a bad move? We don't know. So as it stands now, maybe some of these political juntas, military juntas that we have in Africa currently, as a result of military coup d'etats, maybe some of them will open the doors for the ballot box to come. And I think that's what a lot of people are used to right now, and that's what I think they will call for.
So then does that mean that sort of Africa has more potential for political experimentation? I mean, I live in the States, right? I live in the US, and it seems that everyone agrees that the political system is broken, but no one can even begin to imagine an alternative. We don't have any means for experimentation. We don't have any means for. So do you think that Africa maybe has more potential for these kind of experiments?
Yes. And this is a quick one that maybe my colleague will comment. Yes. Mm-hmm. And it's because of our different historical experiences. The African historical experience is very different from the American historical experience, or maybe some few similarities. If we talk about current United States of America, how old is it?
200, give or take?
200 and something years.
Yeah.
And how old are the African, societies that we have?
Some of them go back, 4,000,
yes.
Plus.
Yes.
Yeah.
So 200 years, they started with something, they're used to it. Give us some 1,000 years or 2,000 years, and let's see what will happen in the United States. We don't know, something different may emerge. But as far as Africa is concerned, you have over 2,000 years, 4,000 years continuing societies, right? Despite the intrusion of colonialism and imperialism. And some of the indigenous practices are still there. Vestiges of them are still there. The chiefs are still there. In the United States, you don't have chiefs. If you mention chief, they will all say, oh, just go to the reservations, right? That's where you have some indigenous American chiefs, right? But if you talk about the concept of chief, many Americans will not understand what it is. But if you come to Africa and you say chief, you say the chief woman. If you say the chief, if you say the Tindana, or who is in charge of the land, if you say even a society that doesn't have a chief but exists, if you say a theocratic society, which is ruled by priests and stuff, you find a lot here. And so African societies do have a plethora of systems that are useful and can be used to rule or govern a people and society. And that's why they will experiment with different ones. Whereas in the United States, maybe you just have just one thing that has been with the United States for about 200 something years.
So then I guess one of my last questions that I have is about China in Africa, right? With the Belt and Road, they've been investing a huge amount of money. It seems that they will continue to do business with countries that have had coups, whereas the West seems very to be anti that. in your opinion, is China a new kind of neocolonialism, or is China different from neocolonialism? China in Africa, I suppose.
Let my
if I
colleague
come in-
take a bite at
that's it.
that, and I will come to it later.
Yeah. Well, what I'd love to sort of say something about kind of the African democracy, but it's all right. I think my brother did justice to it. Is that okay?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. Now, what do you want me to talk about? The case of China or the African democracy?
Whichever one you'd like. If you have
Well,
more
I
thoughts
just wanted
about
to say,
African democracy, yeah.
just some few ones exactly about the African democracy. I was very happy with what Prabhucho was saying. Anytime I talk, to people about the African democracy, I tell people that you cannot say that before the arrival of the colonizers, Africa did not know democracy. Democracy started in Africa. If you want to sort of count in terms of years, in the year I would say 1200 and something. In the Empire of Mali. That's why the first constitution was written. It's called what? The Agreement of Kuru Kamfuga. Kuru Kamfuga is the top of the hill, the flat area on top of the hill where we can sit down and talk. There, the people of the Empire of Mali in 1200 and something, they sat down and drafted something. This is supposed to be the duty of black people, the duty of men, duty of women, and everything was put in place for the harmonious living and progress of every member of society. So how can we say that the West is going to come and teach democracy to Africa? I disagree completely. I believe that African societies are in that turmoil, and I say it anytime I write and anytime I talk, because what? African leaders were deceived into embracing the Western model of democracy. And then what I mentioned after that is this one. I'm very happy to know that today there's a Burkinabe, politician, whose name is Laurent Badou. He's a law professor. In the year, I would say, 1990, he founded his political party, which was a little party called PAREN, P-A-R-E-N, meaning Parti Africain la Renaissance, the African Party for Renaissance. And he's saying, why? I'm creating this party because it sort of embraces all those things that we have forgotten, but we need now. The PAREN tells you that in the African pre-colonial society, what the West is calling today democracy, or I would say communism, or capitalism, all those things are present in the African traditional society. And we'll just mention 2 examples to you. We had the farm, which is somewhat communalistic. It belongs to the whole family. Everybody works on it from morning till, let's say, 3 p.m. And from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., everybody goes to work on his or her little plot of what? Farm, plot of land. Is there any better model of what combination, harmonious of what communalism or communism and capitalism, if you want, but without any aggressivity, without any greed, without stepping on anybody's toes? It's natural, organic, or indigenous, as my colleague has said, And so to me, what I would say is this one: the natural evolution of African societies has been truncated. Africa was supposed to go through, I would say, her own maturity. Mistakes, correct them, and go on, set back and go on. Just like what Western societies have done, just like what America has somehow done within such a short time. So to me, what is happening now in Africa is the sort of an attempt to sort of go back onto that organic or endogenous or African progress of Africans as human beings. And that's what is happening in Africa. So with the coups, for me, we have the return of democracy. You understand me? I will just mention one little example to you. People are saying that Traore is the transition president of Burkina Faso. That's what the media is saying. That's what Westerners are saying. That's what Traore is saying also. Just 1 year, and I'll go. And the Burkinabe population, the majority of Burkinabe are saying, no, the guy is not going. We'll keep him there. We had some years of rotten, corrupt military officers who sort of brought us backward. Civilians came in the name of Western democracy, brought us backward. But this young man is listening to us. He is the man for us. You understand me? So I don't see anything which is more than democracy compared to this one. If people tell Traore today to go, he will go. There are so many coups, by the way, so many plots that were thwarted by the people, so many coups, I would say, plotted against Traore. He doesn't even mention them at all. He doesn't see him as anything important. He believes if I die today, life is going to go on. There are so many young Burkinabe who are going to follow my path if they find it a good path. That's what Sankara was saying. There's nothing better. There's no model of democracy which is more, I would say, which is sharper than this one. They respect themselves. Nobody imposes himself on them. You know, with the jihadist attacks and with political authorities backing the jihadists up, it's not democracy. The president is civilian, has been elected, but people are going down, they're hungry. They can't live peacefully. There's no democracy. So this soldier comes, and now people can sleep peacefully. We have more food to eat. Salaries are not bad at all. And nobody's in jail. You go to jail only when you embezzle the money of the country. In my view, there's nothing better than this when you talk about democracy. You understand me, sir? Well, that's what I would say. No?
Yeah.
Right.
So also then,
go
do you
ahead.
think that Traore will, because of course,
Mhm.
West still has a huge amount of power.
Mhm.
Do you think Traore will have to
Mhm.
step down and
Mhm.
then make a performance of
Mhm.
being elected to
Mhm.
president? Or do you think,
Mhm.
he is rejecting the
Yeah.
idea that he has to
Yeah.
perform to the West and he'll just he feels he
Mhm.
can be instated? Obviously, I'm asking you to speak for someone else, but
Yeah.
maybe there
I
will be a
understand all
small
this.
performance for the West so that we can say, oh, there is democracy in Burkina Faso.
Yeah. Well, I will say, Oles, I will say what history has taught me, what the various years have taught me is what human beings change. But if I sort of limit myself to what Traore has said and done today, I don't see him dancing to the tune of the West. I can't see that. You understand me? So what I'm saying is this one. Either people are going to say Traore will stay in power. Is that okay? And people might even say, but no, we don't need elections. He is our voice. And even if we have ballots, he's still going to be our voice. People can go and vote, and I'm sure Traore is going to win. You understand me? We have some political parties today that are rejected by the Burkinabe civilians, populations. They say, you came to perform for hundreds of years. You performed for 20 years, for 10 years, and you did nothing good. It's going to say, you're a bootlicker for France, to France, you're a bootlicker to the US. You understand me? Get away. There are some people today, some politicians, all politicians in Burkina Faso today, when they see them close to the office of Traore, the civilians will drive them away. So you see how it is. So I don't see Traore dancing to the rhythm of any music played by the West. It might happen because human beings change. But what I see is this one. Either people are going to sort of literally plead with him to stay in power and continue what he has started. And he might accept to do that for something like 4 years. If we believe in the reincarnation of Sankara, he worked for 4 years, led the country for 4 years, and when he was killed, and he knew that he was going to be killed. A kind of prophetic attitude. I don't wish that to Traore. I don't wish to kill him. He's a good man to me, But I can see a situation where if I ask him to continue his work, he will do it. If there are ballots, I'm sure he's going to win. And he'll do his work for a certain number of years. Then I don't see him refusing to step down. If somebody who's a progressist and is in a plain way, an honest person shows up and wants to continue the path, but while being of Burkinabe people, I can see Traore what sitting, giving power to that person. But dancing to the rhythm of the West, I can't see that now, my brother. I would say no. That's why he's very close to Putin today. I'm not saying Putin as an example. You understand me? But again, look at what happened during that summit. You get my point? That's what I would say. But again, time will tell. Time will tell. Yeah.
Well, we've
Did I answer your
gone way
question?
over time. It's
Okay.
already
Oh, right. Thank you.
quite a
I
bit
have so
later.
many things to say.
Yeah, I had too many
Right.
questions,
Okay.
I guess. Too many questions, and we tried to cover too much
So
ground.
many things to say.
But thank you so much for
Yeah.
coming, and thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure. It's a
You're welcome.
pleasure. Always.
You're welcome.